Dear God, great God, generous God, give us eyes to see. Amen. So, how did Jesus get in the boat when he was preaching to people on the shore? An English major will tell you that that's how Matthew got Jesus into the boat, because he was going to go somewhere after, and it made sense to put him there then, for continuity's sake. Fundamentalists wouldn't want you to know that. They would say, oh, there's all these stories and they all happen just this way. But if you look at the story of how these gospel writers, who were all wonderful storytellers, set these stories up, they all did it their own way, for their own purposes. And this is how Matthew does it. So, you wake up on any given day with the best intentions, right? And you have three things you want to do, and what happens? The dog has spent the night throwing up. So there's the cleaning up to do, and wondering where the heck a laundromat is, because you can't clean the rug on your own with your washer, and maybe you ought to take the dog to the vet because she's just not any better. And you remember also that it's your nephew's birthday. You get a text or you see something on Facebook about that. But the line at the post office is out the door because there's only one attendant. And so by noon, you haven't completed a single thing you set out to do. In fact, you've really fallen behind, and life has once again happened. The wonderful biblical interpreter Fred Craddock has said that if you're going to have any joy, any purpose, any peace, you are going to have to put it together out of fragments, because you are not going to get 24 smooth hours in a row. It does not work that way. But the wonderful thing about it is that the Bible understands that. Jesus himself understood that, says Dr. Craddock. The Bible was not written by some relaxed person all lathered up with sunscreen under an umbrella by the beach drinking lemonade. The Bible was written by people who had to put life together with short pieces of string, and Jesus knew that. Now, the parable in today's text is a prime example here. Here's a guy who goes out to sow, and some of the seed falls on a path, and before it can germinate, sparrows come along and they gobble it up. And then he spreads some seed on shallow soil, and it springs up, but it has no depth, so it succumbs quickly to the elements. Some seed falls among weeds, and weeds choke it out. But some of the seed, a small percentage, falls on good soil and produces abundantly, nature being so very tenacious. Well, the part of this story we didn't read, I didn't ask Dan to read this morning, follows on this bare parable. And in that additional section, Matthew's church, not Jesus, Matthew's church gives its interpretation about how we're all different kinds of soils. Some of us are like the hard path, stubborn to the end. Some of us are shallow. All we watch is game shows on television. Sorry. Someone once said that a shallow person is defined as a person who says, quote, I'm thinking of killing myself, but I want to lose 5 pounds first. Some of us are like weedy ground. We run with the wrong crowd and it does us no good. But I think all Matthew had to work on was the bare parable, as Dan read it. And I say this because the collection of sayings that we get from Jesus don't have any interpretations at all. The churches of the first century gave us those interpretations. And this one comes specifically from Matthew's church. And his church wanted to answer the question, why doesn't the preaching in this church make more of a difference? And the answer is only a few people really seem predisposed to listen, which gets the preacher off the hook, I guess. Well, without the explanation of Matthew's church, I'd say the bare parable, as it comes to us from Jesus, is saying something a little different. It says, hey, spread your seed liberally. For heaven's sake, don't go out and place it selectively, because you never know whether it will prosper. Different people react differently to what's offered to them depending on the day and the weather and their circumstances. You never know. And life is like this. I once thought of going into public school teaching, and I spoke with a professor at the University of Washington who said to me right away, teachers have to be content with sowing the seed, not with reaping. 99 out of 100 times, you never see the benefit of what you've invested. Same with preaching, right? You scatter the seed, the big ideas, certain principles of living. You don't know what will happen. Some ministers want more of a return, so they bail out and go back to grad school, get an MBA. I remember in my first year of being a student minister, I was close to a doctor in Little Myrtle Point, Oregon, where I was serving, and I was so impressed at the clear-cut help he offered people day after day with their ailments, and I envied that. But eventually I made my peace with being a minister, with sowing ideas, tossing them out there, trusting that God will use some of it for good. So I preach these sermons, I teach my classes, I send essays and poems to magazines. It all amounts to tossing stuff into the wind. I once taught a class on meditative prayer, and years later, a woman from my church in Ashland who had become a state legislator came to me and told me how critical that technique was to her to just survive emotionally in the Oregon legislature. And this was way before it became totally crazy. So we cast out our deeds, our words, and again, 999 out of 1,000 go nowhere, at least we guess. Especially, those we spend the most time placing just right. And then what comes up is so often a total surprise. That's what this parable is saying. So, when you take a little extra time with someone at work, going the extra mile for them, they don't rush over and make you Employee of the Year. And if you make a special visit to one of the kids in the Little League and you help her with her batting, no one on the 5 o'clock news is going to come over with a film crew and do a piece on you, right? Still, you've done something worth doing. And you've done it well, even if you don't know whether what you offer will mean anything in the long run, right? It may well be that most of the seeds that you and I plant get wasted or are ignored or just don't amount to very much. Will Willimon said he remembered one line a teacher said in all of high school. This was from a junior level history teacher who said to him, and the whole class, life is too short not to risk everything and live boldly. Life is too short not to risk everything and live boldly. And Dr. Willimon said that stuck. And no words have ever been more helpful to him in his whole life. That's the thing about education. What you remember most is seldom anything about the content of the teaching, right? Also, the parable says, please stop thinking that the success of your endeavors is entirely up to you. That's just not true. Seeds get planted and they come up on their own schedule, if at all. Your job is just to spread the seed and not to worry over it. Joan Borisenko has said, one of the hardest things in life is to get to the place where you can become unattached to the results of your own actions, right? One of the hardest things in life, get to the place where you can become unattached to the results of your own actions. I suppose you can measure a person's maturity based on that thing alone. And one of the basic principles, of Alcoholics Anonymous is helpful here too. If you find it impossible to accomplish something, don't keep banging your head against the same wall, for heaven's sake. Find another way to fulfill your wish. The Reverend Bruce Larson was absolutely stunned years ago by the extravagant love his mother showed his children. No more caring grandmother ever lived, he said. But Bruce himself was forever frustrated because he spent his lifetime carting home to her his trophies, new jobs, books published, awards. She was never interested. And his kids helped him with this. They said, "Dad, leave Grandma alone. She doesn't like herself very much, and you're too close to her for her to like you very much either. So quit playing your life to her. It's a no-win deal." And Bruce eventually took their advice. He realized that all those years he had been making himself a victim of his mother's inability to value him. He came to rejoice that the parent who could not bring herself to accept her child could grow into the grandparent who could, in fact, bless his children. So look at it this way. You work hard to get your father to love you. Here's another, variation on the same theme. You work hard to get your father to love you, and you work and you work and you give and nothing. But you adopt a dear widower on your street, and you have him over, and maybe he can become the grandfather to your kids that they were missing. Back to the parable. So liberally. I mentioned the following quote before. Mother Teresa said, "Failure is the kiss of Jesus. It releases you to spread your seed somewhere else, a little more widely, if you will accept that challenge." Now, most of the parable of the seed speaks of seed that failed. But I ask you, is this a parable of failure or a parable of success? I mean, you can read it either way. It all depends on what you're looking for, right? What you're predisposed to see. Some of us are better at seeing failure in life than success. Maybe the miracle in the parable is that by the sheer grace of God, some of the seed took hold at all. One realization, that what you offered somebody really mattered can carry you a very long way in life. I mean, it has to. Jesus, impressed thousands probably on this earth, a few thousand. But after his death and resurrection, it was a literal handful of people who made it last. He cast out a tremendous amount of seed, but it only took root in a few people. But that was all it was needed. That was all it was needed. 80% of life is just showing up, said someone. You do it, and you leave the rest to luck. Then you figure out what luck is. Maybe that's God. Here's another quote from Mother Teresa. "Few are called to do great things. Few are called to do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love." But then, who is to say what a small thing is as opposed to a big thing? I mean, I get mixed up with these things all the time. Consider the subtle gifts of God. I mean, here we are in July. Summer is so abundant. It comes around once a year, and there are the other 3 seasons that come before it that help us forget it, so that when summer comes again, we are astounded one more time, right? I suppose you can experience summer's abundance best, maybe, at a farmer's market, right? Or a simple roadside stall. Let me close with a poem that celebrates this, written by a favorite poet I've had the fortune to work with a couple of times. His name is Yi Young Lee. I found it this morning, in fact, in a New York Times opinion piece by Tish Warren Harrison, and it too, finding it, felt like a gift, a subtle gift of God. Is it a small gift or a large gift? You decide. Here is the poem. In fact, the poem is really a meditation. It's called From Blossoms. From Blossoms. From blossoms comes this brown paper bag of peaches we bought from the boy at the bend in the road where we turned toward signs painted peaches. From laden boughs, from hands, from sweet fellowship in the bins comes nectar at the roadside, succulent peaches we devour, dusty skin and all. Comes the familiar dust of summer, dust we eat. Oh, to take what we love inside, to carry within us an orchard, to eat not only the skin but the shade, not only the sugar but the days, to hold the fruit in our hands, adore it, then bite into the round jubilance of peach. There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background. From joy to joy to joy, from wing to wing, from blossom to impossible blossom to sweet impossible blossom. Amen.